We're back here at the Hall of History and our continuing look at the Vietnam War, or Vietnam conflict as it is officially referred to, as war was never declared. This picture you can see some of the fighting conditions uh, over in Vietnam. And it was Vietnam is pretty much the southern part is subtropical country, and so you had a lot, jungle, a lot of undergrowth, places for people to hide. To get right down to it. What was combat like in Vietnam? If you talk to anybody over there, it was very, very discouraging. It was with the Viet Cong, actually a irregular army. They had no uniforms. They just blended right into the population. Women were fighting, children were fighting, and it was very, very difficult to tell friend from foe, and that made it very, very discouraging for U.S. troops. Many of these officers at the time grew up in World War II and the Korean War, where you had armies that had official uniforms and you fought pitched battles. Also, speaking, it's a subtropical climate. There was a disease, terrorism, uh, especially in Saigon. Bombs would be going off, planted by insurgents there. You just never knew what was going to happen at any particular time. Not too much unlike what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. One of the technologies the United States used was napalm, and that was just to burn off the jungle. You also hear about Agent Orange, and especially in a lot of bases over in Vietnam, they would burn the jungle back to create fire lanes. Also, at this time, the use of helicopters really came into vogue. They started getting used in Korea, but at this time, they were used as an offensive weapon and also as to get injured troops out of the battle zone. The Viet Cong guerrilla tactics, as we again learned later on in Iraq and Afghanistan, they would not fight pitched battles with the United States. There was no way they would win a pitched battle like the large battles you saw in World War II and in Korea. They used hit and run tactics. They just would not stand and fight, and this got very, very defeating, morale wise for the United States. The United States didn't lose a battle, but they ended up losing the war over there. And you can read the quote by the general of the North Vietnamese army there. The Viet Cong would set up these stakes into the ground. Troops would fall through holes, get impaled on these. They used tunnels quite effectively throughout to move troops, to hide from bombing and so forth. Uh, Remind me to tell you a couple stories from some gentlemen I used to work with at Guardsmen that served over there, and had a couple. One was a tunnel rat, and about some very, very interesting experiences. As it kept going, many U.S. troops were tortured by the Viet Cong, especially fighter pilots, and in retaliation, the Americans also resorted to torturing Vietnamese prisoners and sometimes civilians. This really got out of hand. You started getting the jungle fever, and as happens many times in combat, you become a whole different person. You create this whole different persona due to the conditions of the battlefield. And some of these stresses, psychological breakdown. Uh, this is not unlike what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan on occasions. If you remember back when we watched the Saving Private Ryan video on the on the landing in D-Day, some German troops were trying to surrender, and the American troops just shot them. And this whole idea, you start breaking down under the stress of being shot at, and during the stress of battle. And you can see some of the examples that the U.S. troops and also the Vietnam troops would do below here. Well, what ended up at home, the U.S. troops were not welcome. They came back home. They were started to be seen as baby killers. Uh, you can talk to troops that came home during this time, and it was not a pretty sight. It is not like the troops coming back with the parades after World War II, or even now the troops coming back from Afghanistan. The soldiers were not highly thought of when they returned home from their deployment overseas.